Good day and greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Dr. Charles Cotter. I'm the Learning Navigator, the Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program, part of the e-learning series. This is an on-demand learning program and comprises of 6 modules. Each of the registered learners will receive a SlideShare presentation per module, and then also a detailed workbook which comprises the content, but also a series of learning activities, which I'll expect you to complete at the end of each of these modules. I think this is probably the best way of continuing the engagement and also to stimulate discussion between the Learning Navigator and the registered learners. As a form of introduction, I'd like to give you a quick overview of my professional pedigree. Essentially, I've been in the field of education, training, and development for the last 19 years. Of those 15 as an independent contractor. I've been very privileged to have worked for over 140 different companies, both in the public and private sector. And of course, this stretches across 18 different countries and 4 different continents. My area of subject matter expertise is strategic management, change management, and also strategic human resources management. Welcome to Module 3. If I could start off with Module 3 with a quick overview of the 3 key learning outcomes of this particular module. I'd like to start off the module by completing a questionnaire, which will give you an indication of whether you're type O or type D orientation in terms of a crisis. In other words, are you opportunity or danger orientated? Do you see the opportunities and try to capitalize on them as much as possible? Or do you see the risks and danger inherent in change, and particularly in a crisis? And of course, this leads to differing personalities and of course, differing behavior. And of course, it's very important as change management and leadership teams that we are sensitized and we are also aware of what these different personalities and behavioral traits result in. And of course, this enables us to manage the process more effectively. I'd also like us to look at a second learning outcome, and that is to interrogate the reasons for resisting change. I'm going to give you a couple of generic reasons, research-based reasons, but as part of the learning activity, which you'll find in Workbook 3, I would like you to identify your company's specific reasons for resisting change. And of course, as part of the gap analysis, I'd like you to identify the strategies on how to mitigate or counteract these reasons for resistance to change. I'd like to conclude Module 3 by looking at one of the foremost managerial techniques. It's a model developed by Cotter from Harvard University in terms of managing and breaking down the resistance to change. And we're going to work through each of these 6 techniques and look at how we can apply each of them during the different stages of the change transition cycle. Perhaps I could start off with an indication. This is from the Japanese language, and of course the word crisis comprises of 2 characters. The one represents danger and the other symbol represents opportunity. And this is a quote by John F. Kennedy, and of course this is indicative of the dichotomy of change and crisis management. There are inherent opportunities, but there's also inherent risks and danger. And of course, as we exhibit these type of traits, it's not that any of us are wrong, it's just our default setting. And this is our perspective and our perception of change. Do you view change more optimistically as an opportunity, or do you view change more pessimistically as a danger and as a risk? So the only way of ascertaining our orientation towards change, either the type O or type D, is to complete a SemiScientific Questionnaire. So this you'll find in Workbook 3, and I'd like you to complete the questionnaire. And of course, the bottom of the questionnaire will give you an interpretation grid. I'm just going to run through it very quickly, just to give you a quick overview of exactly what it entails. So if you score in the range of 18 to 35, this would suggest that you are a high type O. And of course, this is where you are very positive. Your outlook tends to be very positive. You tend to be very optimistic towards change. You have a high tolerance towards ambiguity, and you can manage and perform tasks simultaneously. So multitasking is not a problem. And ideally, this is the type of person that you would indeed want in your team. If you score from the range of 36 to 53, this would suggest a moderate type O. And again, this is somebody who's a little bit more cautious. than the high type O. Their adoption rate to change is not as rapid, so they are not the early adopters like the high type O, but they're also somehow able to see the benefits of change, and they're very likely to do some experimentation and to identify the practicalities of change. Their resilience to change also, like the high type O, tends to be quite high. If you, however, score in the range of 54 to 71, this would suggest that you're moderate type D, and this is people that are very apprehensive initially during change. So you see heightened levels of shock and denial initially, and also resistance to the implementation of change. And they need a clear direction and focus. And I think this is where change leaders can be very instrumental in navigating people through the adversity of change, especially during a crisis management. And of course, at some point they are confused, and like I said, they need clear direction and focus. And I think change leaders could really assist in providing clarity and providing vital information, not be guilty of information overload, but certainly provide adequate and sufficient information to enable them to have the same realization and insights, and to be more positively attuned and focused on the change. If you score in the range of 72 to 90, this would suggest a high type D, and these are probably the most problematic team members, the most resistant team members to change in your team. They are very perplexed, and of course, their tolerance for ambiguity is very low. They like a lot of stability. They want predictability. And of course, as we said in Module 1, this is quite challenging because the business environment in which we find ourselves is the VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And of course, this is almost the Achilles tendon of this type of high type D individual, because they are very uncomfortable. They tend to be very risk averse, and of course they feel victimized during times of change. And unlike the high type O, who often sees himself as a victor, as a benefactor of change, the high type D type of team member would often see themselves, they would perceive themselves as being a victim of change. And of course, they would be the most resistant to change. So the stage and the spectrum is set for leaders to have almost a cross-section of these individuals in your team, and then of course the ability to manage them through the adversity of crisis. And of course, like I said with Module 1, try to avoid going into firefighting crisis mode as much as possible. So what I would like you to do in terms of formalizing this is to complete Learning Activity 6 in Workbook 3, and I'd like you to do this in 2 phases. The first phase is the self-diagnosis. I would like you to complete the questionnaire individually, and of course this will give you a very accurate indication of whether you're high, moderate type O, or high or moderate type D. And of course, once you've completed the individual diagnosis and you've done the analysis and you've been able to pinpoint where you are on the type O and type D spectrum, the continuum, then of course I'd like you to circulate a copy of the questionnaire, perhaps to 5 of your key team members, and then do the analysis and the interpretation of their questionnaires, and of course give me an indication in your response. And again, I wouldn't expect more than 2 to 3 page essay in which you just give an indication, a synopsis of the range within your team, be it type O, type D, high or moderate, and then of course an indication of how you will manage almost this cross-section. You're likely to find statistically that you'll have a good balance within your team. How would you then manage? How would you harness the high type O, because they are almost the television runners. They are the mavericks. They almost need to be restrained in some shape or form. If you don't restrain them, they could burn their fingers. They could, almost like Icarus, burn their wings, and they could, of course, end up being a victim of change instead of a victor. And this could also be very detrimental and harmful for the team as a whole. So how do you restrain them? How do you harness the moderate type O? Because I think you can really capitalize on their positivity, their energy, the exuberance that they have, because they're not as quick as the high type O in adopting change. And of course, the flip side of the coin, like we said, with the Japanese language. The flip side of the coin is the type D. And then again, I would also like you to give me a brief indication if you have certain team members who are moderate type D, how do you win them over? How do you get them to see the benefits? And of course, this will accelerate their growth up the change transition cycle through stage 3, ultimately to stage 4. And then, of course, their loyalty towards the change, their commitment, like we said with module 2, they can almost become ambassadors of the change. And then, of course, the most problematic would be how to convince the high type D that change is good, especially major upheaval, like we said with module 1, the type 2 or the whitewater rapids kind of change, which induces crisis management mode. I think it'll be quite an interesting exercise, and I'd love to get your input and your views in terms of the synopsis within your team, yourself as a team manager, as a leader, etc., and then also how you will navigate your various team members and capitalize on their respective orientations towards change, be it type O or type D.
This is Charles Cotter signing out. I'd like to thank you for watching the video clip, Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program. Please be on the lookout for subsequent uploads on my YouTube learning channel of the other modules. Also, please have a look at the chat box section. You'll see in the comment section. If you'd like to access a copy of the workbook in PDF format, I'll gladly email that to you for this specific module, but also the other modules of the various video clips. I'd also like to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please press the notification bell to be alerted of the subsequent uploads of the other modules, and also like to encourage you to reach out and contact me. My contact details and social media presence will be provided on the screen very shortly, so I'd encourage you to reach out, and of course I would welcome any sort of communication or feedback regarding this video clip or any other learning content on my YouTube learning channel. Thank you. I appreciate your ongoing interest and active social media support. Thank you. You keep well. Bye-bye.